For nearly a century, humanity paid tribute to the Carthan Combine, a vast alien trade empire that controlled the inner trade lanes and dictated terms to dozens of younger species. And began quietly after first contact, when Earth's early exploration fleet stumbled into a border system rich in hydrogen scoops that the Combine claimed by ancient charter, and rather than fight a war they could not win at the time, human diplomats signed agreements that forced Earth to deliver raw materials, rare metals, refined fuels, and later finished goods every standard cycle. And at first the payments were small and framed as access fees, but over decades they grew heavier, more insulting, and more public, with Carthan overseers present at human ports, watching cargo tallies, correcting manifests, and occasionally seizing shipments for imagined shortfalls, while combined media networks describe humanity as a useful but minor client species, clever with trade but soft in resolve. And inside the Galactic Council chambers, human ambassadors were seated far from the central ring, often spoken over or ignored entirely. Yet Earth complied, because each shipment bought time, and time was the one resource humanity valued above all others. And while tribute ships lifted off from Earth, Mars, Titan, and the outer habitats, carrying wealth outward, something else flowed inward unnoticed: data, sensor readings, market patterns, fleet movement schedules, and political habits of the Combine, all gathered by human logistics officers, shipping analysts, and quiet intelligence teams embedded in the tribute bureaucracy, and people like Daniel Harper, a mid-level transport coordinator in the lunar yards, who had started his career counting containers and ended up mapping the exact response times of Carthan Customs fleets, or Admiral Susan Keller, then a junior officer assigned to escort duty for tribute convoys, who learned how Carthan patrols reacted to minor deviations, how long they took to escalate, and when they backed down, and even as public opinion on Earth simmered with resentment, the official line remained calm cooperation, and human leaders like President Alan Brooks spoke of long games and patient growth, assuring citizens that survival came before pride. But beneath the surface, Earth changed. Shipyards expanded under civilian labels. Research programs were buried inside energy efficiency grants, and military doctrines were rewritten to emphasize speed, autonomy, and decisive first strikes, all while the Combine grew complacent, seeing only the steady flow of tribute and mistaking discipline for submission, until the cycle when the Carthan tax auditors announced a new adjustment, citing increased protection costs along the frontier, demanding 40% more resources effective immediately. And when Ambassador Laura Mitchell protested before the council, she was laughed at by Carthan delegates, their lead speaker calmly explaining that humanity had benefited from Combine order and should be grateful for continued tolerance. And the council recorded the decision without debate, because no one expected Earth to resist. And that night, as the news spread across human worlds, there were no riots, no dramatic speeches, just a quiet shift. A signal passed through secure channels that had existed for decades, and in offices, ships, and research stations, people who had trained for a future no one believed was real finally received confirmation that the future had arrived. And the next tribute convoy launched on schedule, larger than ever, heavy with containers, escorted by human ships flying the same neutral markings they always had, and Carthan patrols scanned them lazily, unaware that inside the holds were not just resources but modified hulls, folded strike craft, and command cores linked to a network the Combine had never detected. And when the convoy crossed the midpoint relay and entered the Combined Core Protection Zone, the order was given quietly, without ceremony, and the first thing the Carthan operators noticed was silence, because their external sensors went dark, their communication nets flooded with false echoes, and before alarms could propagate, human ships shed their skins, neutral hulls falling away to reveal war gray armor beneath, engines flaring far beyond civilian limits. And in that moment, the debt humanity had been paying for generations came due, and the galaxy was about to learn that patience had never been weakness at all. The sudden transformation of the tribute convoy into an attack formation unfolded faster than any Carthan doctrine allowed for, because the Combine had built its entire security philosophy around visible deterrence and ritual response, not deception and speed. And as human vessels accelerated, Admiral Susan Keller, now commanding from the core ship, Resolute Dawn watched projected overlays bloom across her tactical display, showing Carthan patrol craft scrambling in confusion, their captains, demanding clarification from command nodes that no longer answered coherently. And Keller did not issue dramatic orders or speeches because the plan had been drilled into every crew member for years under the guise of emergency logistics exercises. So each ship moved independently yet in harmony, strike elements peeling off toward relay stations while heavier units surged forward to isolate the nearest fleet anchor. And on the Carthan side, Commander Veshtal, a veteran officer responsible for inner lane security, struggled to understand what he was seeing as his sensor officers reported human engine outputs exceeding known tolerances, weapon signatures that did not match any catalog profile, and electronic warfare patterns that seemed to anticipate every countermeasure before it was deployed. And Veshtal demanded status updates from the Combine Defense Bureau, only to receive fragmented responses filled with contradictory orders, because at that same moment across dozens of systems human sleeper algorithms activated, flooding combined networks with years of carefully crafted misinformation finally weaponized, and shipping guilds that had relied on human logistical software found their route data corrupted, causing civilian traffic to clog escape vectors, while combined commanders hesitated, fearing political repercussions if they fired on what had always been compliant tribute ships. And that hesitation proved fatal when the first relay station fell, not in an explosion but in silence as its control core was overridden by human code and its automated defenses turned inward, and across the inner lanes lights shifted from Combine blue to human white, a subtle change that went unnoticed until traffic control realized they had lost authority entirely. And on Earth, President Alan Brooks sat in a secure room with a small circle of advisors, watching the same feeds without expression, because this moment had been accepted as irreversible long before it arrived. And Brooks remembered the years of compromise, the speeches that had earned him criticism at home and condescension abroad. And now he authorized the next phase without raising his voice, knowing that restraint now would only prolong suffering later. And that next phase reached beyond the initial convoy as hidden shipyards in the asteroid belts of Sol and Alpha Centauri activated fleets that had never been publicly acknowledged, vessels built with modular crews and autonomous command, capability designed to operate even if central authority was lost. And as they jumped simultaneously into contested space, the illusion of a limited incident shattered, and the Galactic Council chambers erupted in confusion as delegates demanded explanations, only to find that human ambassador Laura Mitchell was no longer present, having departed hours earlier under routine pretext, leaving behind a sealed statement that would not be opened until the Council formally acknowledged the Combine's violation of prior agreements, a procedural trap laid years in advance. And while politicians argued, the war moved with brutal efficiency. Human forces targeting not population centers, but logistical hubs, shipyards, fuel depots, and communication nexuses, stripping the Combine of its ability to coordinate rather than its ability to exist. And this choice unsettled other species watching from the margins, because it suggested a level of strategic maturity they had never attributed to humanity. And on the ground in outlying Combine systems, local administrators found human Marines landing with precise objectives, securing control rooms, detaining overseers, and broadcasting simple messages assuring civilians that compliance would ensure safety, and most complied because the humans did not shout or threaten. They simply acted with calm certainty, and even as isolated combined units fought back fiercely, they did so blind and alone, while human commanders like Captain Robert Lane of the Strike Carrier Iron Answer adjusted tactics in real time, exploiting weaknesses that had been documented during decades of tribute escort duty. And Lane recalled standing on a bridge years earlier pretending to be grateful for inspection permission while memorizing patrol patterns. And now those memories translated directly into victory. And by the end of First Standard Day, the Combine had lost control of 3 major trade arteries, something no external power had ever achieved, and panic rippled through their hierarchy as elder counselors realized too late that humanity had never forgotten a single slight, never forgiven a single enforced payment, and never wasted a single shipment. Because every created tribute had been a lesson purchased, and every year of submission had been an investment waiting for return. And as fires burned in the void and emergency signals echoed unanswered, the truth began to spread through alien channels that this was not rebellion or desperation, but collection, and the debt was only beginning to be paid. As the second day of humanity's calculated strike unfolded, the scale and precision of the operation became apparent, because what seemed like isolated attacks on trade arteries and relay stations now revealed itself as a comprehensive campaign against the very infrastructure that sustained the Carthan Combine. And across multiple systems, Admiral Susan Keller oversaw simultaneous boarding operations, electronic countermeasures, and orbital assaults coordinated in real time through a secure mesh of quantum entanglement links that the Combine had assumed was impossible for a client species to maintain. And every decision, from timing to target prioritization, had been refined over decades of study, drills disguised as routine logistics exercises, and covert intelligence gathering, so that each human vessel, whether capital ship or modified freighter, moved as a deliberate instrument of strategy rather than as an improvised attacker, while on Carthan command bridges, officers like Commander Veshtal scrambled to respond, attempting to recall patrol units, redirect fleets, and activate automated defenses, only to find that every communication channel had been compromised, every relay node had been hijacked, and every sensor reading had been manipulated to present false data. And as confusion spread, human strike groups executed maneuvers that mirror classical naval tactics, though adapted to three-dimensional space with greater speed, precision, and the benefit of real-time intelligence that the Combine had never suspected existed. And in orbital engagements, human weapons fired at non-vital points of enemy ships, temporarily disabling propulsion or communication systems, while boarding teams penetrated vessels with minimal resistance, neutralizing key personnel and converting platforms into forward command posts. And on planets where Carthan administrators attempted to rally local militias, human Marines landed with efficiency, disabling weapon caches, establishing defensive perimeters, and using psychological tactics to encourage surrender, emphasizing security over bloodshed, and the effect was immediate. Fear and disbelief spread faster than actual casualties, because the Combine had never faced a species that could strike simultaneously on multiple fronts with such cohesion, and while the Council convened emergency sessions to understand what was happening, Ambassador Laura Mitchell issued messages that were concise and pointed, outlining humanity's historical patience, decades of tribute, and the precise terms of the debt now being collected. And as these messages circulated, other species within the Galactic League began reevaluating their assumptions about humans, noting that they were not rash or impulsive, but methodical, patient, and terrifyingly efficient. And in the midst of this coordinated campaign, President Alan Brooks authorized deployment of reserve units hidden in asteroid belts, orbital shipyards, and deep space platforms, units that had been ostensibly civilian, unarmed, or under construction, but now emerged as fully capable fleets, supplementing existing strike forces, overwhelming Carthan reinforcements, and forcing enemy commanders into reactive stances. And each engagement demonstrated a human principle drilled over decades: strike decisively, maintain initiative, and exploit every moment of hesitation, while at the same time minimizing unnecessary destruction to secure both strategic advantage and political legitimacy. And as human forces advanced through contested space, Carthan media networks attempted propaganda, showing images of human ships destroyed or retreating. But independent observers and rapidly transmitted data from captured platforms revealed the truth. Humanity was systematically dismantling the infrastructure of empire, reclaiming territory, and demonstrating capabilities that the Combine had never acknowledged or prepared for. And by the third day, entire sectors that had once been bustling trade corridors were under human control, with key Carthan fleets isolated and unable to communicate or reinforce. And the ripple effect of panic spread to the Combine's periphery as lesser species realized the depth of human preparation, understanding that what they had mistaken for submission had been decades of careful observation, strategy, and patience. A patience that now translated into unmatched tactical superiority. And on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Admiral Keller coordinated with precision, delegating authority down to junior officers who had trained for these scenarios and exercises masked as routine operations, ensuring that momentum never faltered, while Captain Robert Lane led orbital maneuvers around a major Carthan shipyard, disabling shield generators and electronic defenses without triggering full-scale alarms, allowing Marines to secure the facility intact. And with each success, humanity demonstrated not just martial skill but strategic cunning, turning what the Combine had assumed was a minor rebellion into a demonstration of overwhelming force and calculated vengeance, a lesson that will reverberate throughout the galaxy for generations. because the debt humanity had accrued over centuries of tribute was being collected with ruthless efficiency. And by the end of the Second Standard Day, Carthan command centers were in disarray, fleets were stranded, and every attempted countermeasure was anticipated, disrupted, or rendered irrelevant, leaving the Combined not merely defeated in individual battles, but stripped of the ability to coordinate, communicate, or project authority across the systems they had long dominated. And as humans consolidated gains, it became clear that the galaxy had never truly understood Earth, its people, or the full depth of their patience, preparation, and resolve, and that realization, delayed though it was, would be both horrifying and irreversible for every Carthan officer, politician, and citizen who had ever doubted humanity. On the third day of humanity's meticulously planned campaign, the scale of the operation revealed itself not only in battles and boarding actions, but in the intricate disruption of Carthan economic and communication networks, because the humans had long recognized that warfare was as much about logistics and information as it was about direct confrontation. And as human strike fleets moved through previously controlled sectors, they systematically disabled relay hubs, commandeered supply depots, and encrypted or corrupted financial and trade ledgers that the Combined had relied on for centuries, and every move was executed with surgical precision, ensuring that essential civilian infrastructure remained intact while the enemy's ability to respond was crippled, and inside the Carthan command center's panic began to erode traditional hierarchies. As officers like Commander Veshtal attempted to enforce protocol while encountering contradictory reports, sensor failures, and a flood of human, electronic interference that rendered their established tactics useless. While on Earth, President Alan Brooks, observing live feeds, noted that every maneuver executed by Admiral Susan Keller and her staff followed patterns deliberately designed to maximize psychological impact, demonstrating that humans could wage war with efficiency, minimal loss, and with a ruthlessness grounded in patience and preparation rather than impulse. And as the day progressed, strategic strikes reached key Carthan, shipyards, where human marines landed under the cover of disrupted shields and automated defenses, neutralizing command nodes, capturing vessels, and turning once impervious facilities into forward bases. And even as local Carthan populations looked on in terror, human crews moved with calm discipline, securing control points while broadcasting assurances to civilians that compliance ensured safety, a tactic that not only minimized resistance but further destabilized Carthan command, because now officers had to consider the welfare of populations under their nominal control while their fleets were being isolated and repurposed. And in the void of space, human warships demonstrated maneuvers the Combine had not cataloged, striking simultaneously along multiple vectors, creating overlapping fields of fire and command interference, forcing enemy captains to react instinctively rather than strategically, and each reaction was anticipated and countered, because decades of covert observation, analysis of patrol schedules, and electronic monitoring of Carthan behavior allowed humans to predict enemy responses with remarkable accuracy. And at the same time, Ambassador Laura Mitchell circulated messages to the Galactic Council and neighboring species, not as pleas for aid but as statements of fact. Humanity had been patient, had honored agreements, and now, having calculated that patience into strategic advantage, was merely collecting the debt it had been forced to pay for generations. And these communications caused ripples through allied and neutral species, many of whom began reconsidering their assumptions about humanity's temperament, capacity for organization, and potential for decisive action. And back on Carthan control worlds, officers faced increasingly desperate decisions as critical communication nodes fell under human control. Convoys intended to reinforce embattled sectors were intercepted or rerouted unknowingly into human ambushes, and autonomous human algorithms controlled hijacked defense systems to neutralize threats before combined crews could respond, rendering centuries of technological advantage moot. And in orbital battles, human pilots leveraged precise knowledge of enemy flight corridors, engagement protocols, and weapon ranges, developed through covert observation under the guise of tribute duties, allowing them to engage and neutralize superior Carthan vessels while minimizing human casualties. While on the ground, planetary strikes followed similarly disciplined tactics, with Marines, engineers, and logistical teams securing control points, repurposing defense installations, and establishing a seamless command network that extended human operational control across every captured sector. And as dusk fell across multiple systems, human forces were no longer merely engaging in isolated skirmishes. They had effectively dismantled Carthan governance across entire star systems, leaving the Combine struggling to comprehend the scope of the campaign, while humanity, calm and methodical, prepared to consolidate gains, redistribute forces, and continue the calculated collection of tribute that had now transformed into the total reclamation of control. And as the day ended, the first formal assessments by the Combine's Elder Council revealed an uncomfortable truth. Every assumption about human weakness, patience, and submission had been catastrophically mistaken, and the full measure of humanity's long-term planning, technological adaptation, and disciplined execution was now evident, and the realization that the debt humanity had paid for centuries would be returned with interest in fire, steel, and decisive strategy sank into the consciousness of every Carthan officer and political leader, leaving fear, disbelief, and a grudging respect that would forever alter the perception of humans across the galaxy. As the fourth day of humanity's relentless campaign dawned, the depth of their preparation became terrifyingly clear, because what had initially appeared as a series of tactical strikes now revealed itself as a fully coordinated multi-system offensive aimed at dismantling every pillar of Carthan power. And across the star lanes, Admiral Susan Keller oversaw the synchronized deployment of orbital bombardments, boarding parties, cyber warfare units, and fleet maneuvers designed to neutralize enemy forces without unnecessary destruction, while human intelligence teams operating from deep space outposts manipulated Carthan's sensor networks, feeding false signals to misdirect reinforcements and exaggerate the perceived scale of human presence. And on multiple planets, human marines and engineers established secure footholds in orbital shipyards, refineries, and communication hubs, quickly converting captured infrastructure into forward operational bases while maintaining civilian safety, demonstrating an unprecedented balance between strategic ruthlessness and disciplined restraint. And inside the fragmented Carthan command centers, officers like Commander Veshtal struggled to maintain cohesion as reports contradicted each other. Sensors failed, automated defenses turned against friendly forces, and the communication protocols they relied upon crumbled under coordinated human interference. And while the Combine Council convened emergency sessions to assess the situation, Ambassador Laura Mitchell transmitted carefully worded messages that chronicle humanity's decades of compliance, tribute, and patience, making clear that the current campaign was not impulsive aggression, but the inevitable result of systematic collection of an overdue debt. And these messages circulated rapidly among allied and neutral species, forcing many to reassess the underestimated human potential for strategy, discipline, and patient vengeance, while on the tactical level humans strike. Groups executed maneuvers derived from careful study of Carthan behavior, exploiting predictable reaction patterns, overconfidence, and rigid adherence to protocol, striking simultaneously at multiple vectors to paralyze response. And every fleet action demonstrated mastery over three-dimensional warfare, with human pilots and AI-assisted command networks coordinating movements with precision that rendered Carthan counterattacks ineffective, while in captured sectors, engineers and tech teams reconfigured relay stations, communication hubs, and energy grids to integrate seamlessly with human command structures, denying Combine the ability to retake control even in theory. And as civilian populations observed the calm efficiency of human forces, many submitted willingly, recognizing futility of resistance against an enemy who combined patience, intelligence, and overwhelming power. And President Alan Brooks, monitoring the campaign from Seoul, noted that every operational detail had been anticipated and rehearsed decades in advance, with contingency plans layered upon contingency plans to ensure adaptability, resilience, and maximum efficiency. And as day 4 progressed, entire Carthan fleets found themselves isolated, cut off from command, or misdirected into ambushes orchestrated by human cyber and electronic warfare units, while orbital engagements showcased precise strikes disabling propulsion, communications, and weapon systems without risking civilian infrastructure or human lives unnecessarily. And on planetary surfaces, Marines leveraged captured defensive positions to secure territory with minimal conflict, demonstrating a disciplined, surgical approach to conquest that combined military might, intelligence superiority, and psychological strategy, all of which conveyed an unmistakable message to the galaxy. Humanity had been underestimated at its own peril. Patience was not weakness, and every year of tribute, every act of compliance had been invested in preparing for this decisive moment. And as the fourth day ended, the Combine hierarchy faced a stark reality. The species they had dismissed and exploited had turned centuries of submission into a force capable of dismantling empires, rewriting power structures, and enforcing a debt long overdue, leaving fear, disbelief, and a grudging respect embedded across every level of Carthan society. And the galaxy itself began to understand that Earth was no longer a minor client world, but the center of a calculated, patient, and unstoppable human resurgence. By the fifth day of humanity's meticulously orchestrated campaign, the full magnitude of the operation had become undeniable, because what had begun as coordinated strikes on trade arteries and communication relays had evolved into a comprehensive seizure of strategic nodes, industrial centers, and fleet anchorages that supported the Carthan Combine's very existence. And across multiple star systems, human forces executed maneuvers that combined speed, precision, and overwhelming coordination. With Admiral Susan Keller directing orbital squadrons, boarding teams, cyber warfare units, and autonomous strike craft in a seamless integration that paralyzed Carthan responses, while behind the lines, human intelligence cells had long since infiltrated Combine bureaucracies, shipping guilds, and data networks, allowing operators to anticipate enemy orders, manipulate sensor readings, and redirect reinforcements into traps designed decades in advance. And on the Carthan side, officers like Commander Veshtal found their carefully rehearsed protocols collapsing. As sensors failed, communication grids malfunctioned, and isolated units became ineffective without direction, forcing them into reactive, disorganized maneuvers that further compounded losses, while Ambassador Laura Mitchell broadcast carefully constructed messages across the Galactic Council and allied species, not as warnings but as statements of historical record, emphasizing humanity's patience, compliance, and now, the inevitable collection of an overdue debt, which caused shockwaves among neighboring civilizations, who realized for the first time that the species they had always regarded as minor and cautious possessed extraordinary strategic foresight, technological innovation, and disciplined execution. And throughout the campaign, human marines, engineers, and strike crews maintained a balance of ruthlessness and restraint, disabling Carthan ships' engines, weaponry, and communication arrays while preserving civilian infrastructure and avoiding unnecessary casualties, demonstrating a level of operational maturity that had no precedent, and as captured fleets and planetary installations were repurposed into human operational bases. Enemy forces found themselves not merely defeated in isolated engagements, but stripped of the ability to coordinate, communicate, or project power across previously controlled sectors. And in the void of space, human pilots leveraged their knowledge of Carthan, tactics, reaction patterns, and fleet doctrines gained from decades of covert observation under the guise of tribute missions, allowing them to engage and neutralize superior vessels with minimal risk, while simultaneously employing electronic warfare, false telemetry, and AI-assisted targeting to confuse and disrupt, creating openings for precise, decisive strikes. And on planets where Carthan administrators attempted to rally loyalist militias, human forces landed with surgical efficiency, securing command points, disabling defenses, and establishing psychological dominance through calm, disciplined action that encouraged local compliance while undermining enemy morale. And as Day 5 drew to a close, the galaxy witnessed a transformation. Territories once dominated by the Combine were now under human control. Fleets that had been symbols of invincibility were stranded or repurposed, and the leadership of the Carthan Combine faced the undeniable reality that their assumptions about humanity, its patience, its submission, its perceived weakness, had been catastrophically mistaken. And as President Alan Brooks reviewed operational reports from Seoul, he observed the culmination of decades of patient planning, hidden industrial expansion, intelligence gathering, and disciplined training manifesting in a campaign that combined psychological mastery, technological innovation, and unrelenting strategic pressure, and every decision, every maneuver, every calculated strike reinforced the message that humanity had transformed centuries of enforced tribute into a force capable of dismantling empires, rewriting galactic power structures, and exacting a debt long overdue, leaving the combined hierarchy in disarray, their authority shattered, and the rest of the galaxy in awe, fear, and forced respect, realizing that the species they had underestimated for so long had arrived at the apex of strategic and military dominance, and the cost of underestimation would echo across generations. On the sixth day of humanity's relentless offensive, the scope and precision of their campaign became undeniable, because what the Carthan Combine had initially dismissed as isolated strikes was in reality a fully synchronized, multi-system assault designed to dismantle the very foundations of their empire, and across the inner lanes Admiral Susan Keller-coordinated orbital bombardments, boarding operations, cyber attacks, and fleet maneuvers with flawless timing, exploiting every weakness and hesitation revealed through decades of careful observation, while hidden human intelligence networks continued to manipulate Carthan communications, misdirect reinforcements, and disrupt logistics with surgical efficiency. And on the ground, human marines and engineers secured captured shipyards, refineries, and command centers, converting them into forward operating bases capable of supporting further strikes, all while minimizing civilian casualties and preserving essential infrastructure to maintain order and morale. And inside combined command structures, officers like Commander Veshtal struggled to maintain control, their traditional hierarchies crumbling under the relentless pace, conflicting reports, and electronic interference that render established protocols useless, forcing them into reactive, disjointed maneuvers that only amplified their losses, while Ambassador Laura Mitchell circulated precise historical records and strategic justifications to the Galactic Council and neighboring species, emphasizing humanity's decades of compliance, tribute, and patience, and framing the current campaign as the inevitable enforcement of a debt long overdue, which reverberated across the galaxy, forcing allied and neutral species to reconsider their assumptions about human temperament, strategic foresight, and organizational capacity. And as human fleets advanced, each engagement demonstrated mastery of three-dimensional warfare, combining high-speed maneuvers, overwhelming firepower, electronic deception, and autonomous coordination to neutralize Carthan vessels efficiently, while human marines executed planetary operations with surgical precision, securing control points, repurposing defensive systems, and using psychological strategies to encourage compliance, further destabilizing enemy morale. And in captured sectors, engineers integrated relay stations, energy grids, and communication hubs into a seamless human command network, denying the Combine any capacity to regain control, while autonomous strike craft patrol previously secure lanes to intercept any attempts at regrouping or counterattack. And as Day 6 progressed, entire fleets found themselves isolated, command centers overwhelmed, and infrastructure systematically captured or disabled, leaving Carthan authorities paralyzed, while humans consolidated gains, redistributed forces, and prepared to extend the campaign into remaining strongholds with the same ruthless efficiency. And in every corner of the galaxy, observers noted a profound shift. Humanity, once underestimated and patronized, had turned centuries of tribute, study, and forced compliance into a disciplined, patient, and overwhelmingly effective military and strategic force. And the realization that the debt humanity had quietly collected over generations would now be repaid in fire, steel, and precise, calculated dominance instilled fear, respect, and irreversible recognition that Earth was no longer a minor, client world, but the epicenter of a new, inescapable order. And as President Alan Brooks reviewed the operational reports, he recognized that every element of planning, every hidden industrial effort, and every carefully cultivated intelligence channel had converged perfectly, allowing humanity to impose on an empire that had never anticipated such coordination, patience, or ruthless effectiveness. And by the close of the sixth day, the Combine had been reduced from a confident, galactic power to a fragmented, reactive, and terrified empire, while humanity, calm and methodical, remained poised to continue enforcing the debt and securing its dominance, demonstrating that the species the galaxy had long dismissed had finally arrived with unassailable authority. On the seventh day of humanity's sweeping campaign, the final phase of their meticulously crafted plan reached its apex, because every engagement, strike, and infiltration had been building toward decisive convergence designed to ensure total operational dominance over the Carthan Combine. And across multiple star systems, human fleets moved with cohesion and precision that no enemy could anticipate, integrating orbital bombardments, boarding operations, cyber attacks, autonomous strike, craft and tactical deception into a synchronized network that overwhelmed every combined response, while Marines and engineers on planetary surfaces secure critical command hubs, shipyards, refineries, and communication nodes, repurposing them into forward bases that supported ongoing operations and denied the enemy any opportunity to regroup. And hidden intelligence teams continued to manipulate combined networks, feeding false readings, intercepting messages, and redirecting reinforcements into traps designed years in advance, ensuring that every attempt at recovery failed before it could begin. And inside Carthan Command Centers, officers like Commander Veshtal faced total breakdown authority, as sensors provided contradictory data. Fleets moved without coordination, and automated defenses either misfired or turned against friendly units, while Ambassador Laura Mitchell transmitted messages across the Galactic Council, an allied species chronicling humanity's patience. Decades of tribute and systematic preparation, framing the campaign not as aggression, but as an inevitable collection of a debt long overdue. And these communications caused shockwaves throughout the galaxy, forcing other civilizations to confront the reality of human strategic foresight, technological ingenuity, and disciplined execution. And as the day unfolded, every tactical engagement showcased humanity's mastery of three-dimensional warfare, high-speed maneuvers, overwhelming firepower, electronic deception, and autonomous coordination neutralized Carthan fleets efficiently, while Marines executed planetary operations with surgical precision, securing control points, integrating defenses, and employing psychological tactics to encourage compliance and undermine enemy morale. And captured infrastructure was rapidly integrated into human command networks, denying the Combine any capacity for counterattack, while autonomous patrols monitored key trade lanes to intercept or neutralize any surviving forces. And by midday, entire sectors once considered secure under Combine control had been firmly reclaimed, leaving the Empire paralyzed, fragmented, and incapable of mounting coherent resistance. And as human forces consolidated gains, redistributed fleets, and prepared to extend control into remaining strongholds, the psychological and strategic impact on the galaxy became apparent. Humanity had transformed centuries of enforced submission and tribute into a disciplined, patient, and overwhelmingly effective force capable of dismantling empires, rewriting galactic power structures, and enforcing a debt long overdue in combined leadership, facing the collapse of their authority, fleet disintegration, and systemic control failures, understood at last the depth of their miscalculation, realizing that their assumptions about human weakness, patience, and compliance had been catastrophically flawed. And as President Alan Brooks observed the unfolding operations from Seoul, he recognized the culmination of decades of careful planning, covert industrial expansion, intelligence gathering, and disciplined training, manifesting in a campaign that combined strategic mastery, technological innovation, psychological insight, and unrelenting pressure. And with every Carthan system secured, every fleet neutralized or repurposed, and every communication network under human control, the galaxy witnessed the full measure of humanity's resolve, patience, and capability, a force that had collected its centuries-long debt not with mindless vengeance, but with calculated, precise, and overwhelming dominance, leaving an indelible mark on the Carthan Combine and every civilization that had ever underestimated Earth. And as night fell across multiple systems, the last pockets of resistance were subdued, the debt was finally paid in full, and humanity, calm, methodical, and unyielding, established itself as the preeminent power in the galaxy, proving irrevocably that patience had never been weakness, and that the species once dismissed as minor and compliant now commanded respect, fear, and recognition as a dominant force whose arrival would forever alter the balance of interstellar power.